Welcome. Before you go through the process of paying your owners, there's some information you need to enter into Rent Manager. That way you can make sure the owners are receiving the maximum payout based on your company's setup. Remember that formula we talked about? Here it is again. Let's take a look at this first part of the formula. Bank balance minus withholdings. The bank balance pulls from the operating bank accounts of your owner's properties. Any undeposited funds will not be included in this calculation. So each time you want to calculate the amount the owner should receive, Rent Manager starts with the bank accounts you have designated for each property owned by that owner. Let's go to a specific owner. Select Rental Info, click on Owners, and then select Karen Harrington. Go to the Ownership tab. Karen owns 2 properties, so Rent Manager will look at the default bank for Flagstone Manufactured Home Park and the default bank for Buckeye Hall. This formula works per property, so you can have different setups based on each unique property. Now that we know where Rent Manager pulls the bank balance, the next step is to look at the withholdings. Designating money to withhold tells Rent Manager not to include it in the owner payout. Let's go to one of Karen's properties, since withholdings are established at the property level. Click on Properties, select Buckeye Hall, go to the Owner Check Setup tab. Do you hold security deposits in the same operating bank account for the property? If you're holding security deposits in the same operating bank account for the property, you would not want to pay those deposits out to the owner. So in this circumstance, you would need to tell Rent Manager to exclude security deposits. Select the option to subtract security deposits held from bank balance when writing owner checks. Keep in mind that undeposited funds are always withheld from owner distributions. But perhaps you have other general ledger accounts that should be withheld from the payout. In the section Accounts to Exclude from Check Posting, you will enter any accounts that should not be included in the amount paid to the owner. A common account to exclude is prepaid rent. To add this account, click on the box under Account, select Prepaid Income. Now that account appears. Accounting method lets you choose whether the account should be calculated on a cash or accrual accounting basis. We'll leave this on cash. Balance or activity gives you the option to exclude the full balance of the chosen account or the activity of the account since the last time you paid the owner. Click on Balance to review each option. We'll keep this as balance. Once you have all of the accounts listed, click Save. Now you have one last thing to consider before the first part of the formula is complete. The final withholding option is reserves. Reserve amounts are set on another tab, so click on the Owners tab. A reserve amount is the minimum balance that must be maintained in this property's bank at all times for this owner. It's usually set to make sure there is enough money in the bank to cover any unexpected expenses. Do you need to set reserve amounts for your property bank accounts? Do you have multiple owners on a single property? For this property, let's say Karen has agreed to establish a $500 reserve. Click on the box under Reserve and type 500. Then click Save. Now we have completed the first part of the formula. Rent Manager will now take into account any information you have added about amounts to withhold from the owner payout. The next part of the formula is ownership percentage. Rent Manager pays each owner based on how much of the property they own. So if the owner disbursement after withholdings is $1,000 and there are two equal owners, each one of them would receive $500. The disbursement amount, which is the money left in the operating bank after withholdings, is multiplied by the ownership percentage. Do you have owners who own multiple properties? Click the General tab. In the Check Setup option, there is the option to balance reserves across ownerships. The last part of the formula, plus or minus balanced reserves, allows you to transfer money automatically from a profitable property to a property operating with a negative balance, or a balance below the reserve minimum. In order to do this, both properties must be owned by the same owner. Since Karen owns two properties, she can utilize balanced reserves. So if Karen's property, Buckeye Hall, has a required reserve of $500, but the bank balance is only $300, and her other property, Flagstone Manufactured Home Park, also has a $500 reserve, but is operating at a profit, when Rent Manager goes to calculate the amount to distribute to Karen, $200 will be transferred via journal entry from Flagstone to Buckeye Hall. That would bring Buckeye Hall up to the required reserve amount, and then the remaining portion of Flagstone's profits would be paid out to Karen. If this balancing option is not enabled for Karen's portfolio, Rent Manager would simply pay out the full amount of Flagstone to her, and Buckeye Hall would continue to operate below the reserve amount. Let's select Balance Reserves across ownerships. Now, choose an account to track the transfer of reserve funds between. Then write a memo that will show on the journal entry, distribution of funds to increase balance to minimum requirements. Click Save. So now you understand how owner distribution is calculated. Let's look at the setup needed to actually pay that amount to the owner. On Karen's General tab in the Accounts section, select the General Ledger account that should track distributions paid to the owner. The account that you choose here will be used on the distribution check. Here we have chosen an equity account called Owner Distributions. You can also set this as a default account in System Preferences so that you don't actually have to manually select it for each owner. Select the payment method in the Miscellaneous section. If you don't want to print a physical check from Rent Manager, select Don't Print Checks. Do you want each owner to receive one check, including all properties, or separate distribution checks for each property? You have now completed the required setup. Don't worry, you only need to complete this when you first transition to Rent Manager or when you add a new owner. We will cover how to pay owners in the next activity.